Welcome guys and girls to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to learn about CORS with API Gateway. So what is CORS? CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. But what does it really mean? It is a browser security feature that restricts cross-origin HTTP requests. So what does it mean by cross-origin HTTP requests? So let's say you are running a web server for cat.com and then you call an API which is going to dog.com. So it's going to a different domain. So that counts for cross-origin HTTP request. Or if the request go from one subdomain to a different subdomain, for example, from cat.com to adopt.cat.com, then that's qualified for cross-origin request. If it goes to a different port, for example, from cat.com to cat.com :10700. So basically by default, this is port 80, and now it's trying to go to port 10700 or a different protocol. Let's say HTTPS cat.com to HTTP cat.com. So for security reasons, browsers restrict this kind of cross-origin HTTP requests because your browser don't know whether should they trust the other cross-origin server or not. This means that a web application using the APIs can only request resource from the same origin the application was loaded from, unless you configure CORS. So let's take a look. So there are two kinds of cross-origin HTTP requests. One is called simple, where it has to satisfy all these properties. So it's only for get, head, or post. Post must include the origin header. Request payload content type is text/plain. Multi-part form data or application/xwww form URL encoded. Request does not contain custom header plus requirements is this link. On this one, I'm going to show you, but what I'm going to cover in detail is the non-simple one. Almost all real-world API calls falls under this non-simple category. Because if you see in the simple, it says request does not contain custom header. Very rarely your APIs are not going to have a custom header. So custom header as in authorization. If you are using API key with your API, it has to have X API key and other stuff, right? So how does a CORS flow work for a non-simple cross-origin request? So this is how it works. Let's say your web browser is www.example.com and this web browser is trying to do a GET call, okay? So before the server can do the actual GET API call, first it has to do a CORS check. So the first step would be this web browser will invoke the options method to validate, hey, can I do a GET method? And I am coming from www.example.com. And this remote REST service checks everything, and if everything is good, it says, sure, you can do a GET call. Calling this options method and checking if your website or origin is allowed to call the actual API is known as preflight check. And then this www.example.com do the actual GET API call. And then it gets the response back from the GET call as well, but I am not showing it in the diagram. So how does this look under the hood? The way it works is the web browser calling the options method, then it passes these two headers. One is access control request method saying GET. What that means is example.com is saying, hey, I'm gonna call a GET method. And it also sends what are the headers that it's gonna send in the actual GET call. So it says, I'm gonna send content type, authorization, and X API key. These are just examples, it could be anything else. And this remote REST service responds back and says, okay, you are requesting for GET, but guess what? You could do GET and POST, and you can pass the headers that you are requesting, content type, authorization, X API key, and this is the key part, access control allow origin. So in this case, origin will be the actual website, which is www.example.com, and it's saying asterisk. That means any web server can call get or post. And note that CORS is a feature of the browser, not the backend APIs. Once the web browser gets this access control allow origin for asterisk in this example, it's gonna allow the get call and the CORS check will pass. So this is not really ideal. It's good, but one problem is it's allowing asterisk. So any web server which is gonna call these options, they will get access control allow origin as asterisk, and they will be able to do the get call. But of course, they have to have the API key or some form of other authorization. So in real world, how it looks like is the web browser do the options call, but in the access control allow origin, the remote REST service will specify the actual specific origin and not asterisk. So in this case, let's say another website, let's say www.moreexample.com tries to call this remote REST service. It is gonna get www.example.com, which is not the origin, because the origin in this case will be www.moreexample.com, and when it tries to do the actual get call, it's gonna fail. So in this case, this remote service can only be called from this www.example.com. So you cannot put a wildcard in this access control allow origin. You can either put asterisk or a specific origin. But there are techniques how you can accommodate multiple origins for same APIs. So I'm going to get to that, but let's do a little bit of hands-on so that we understand the basic concepts. Then we'll go to the multi-origin. All right, guys and girls, let's jump into a demo. All right, I'm in trusty AWS API Gateway console. So I have this sample API. This is a GET API. It's pretty straightforward. I have a query string where I'm going to pass name of country, and then it's going to reply back with hello from that country. So if I click test, just to show you guys and girls. So if I passed in name of country, let's say UK or something, click test, it's going to say hello from UK. If I pass in USA, click test, it's going to say hello from USA. And then I deployed this in a stage called dev. This is the URL. And I have also created a sample HTML page, which wants to call this API using the endpoint. So if I run this in Chrome, this will look like this. Okay, so in the HTML, you can put a country name, and then it's basically gonna use it as the query parameter and pass it to the API. So if I show you the code one more time, my HTML skills are subpar, so please don't judge me on the HTML coding. But it's pretty straightforward. It gets the name of the country and then just do a get call with the link from the API stage, and then passes the country. And then it sends the API key, but for this test, I'm not enabling API key. It's just in the screen, but I'm not gonna put anything because I did not enable API key on the API gateway to keep things simple. So let's say I want to put a country name, okay? So let's see if I put India and do click me. See, I get nothing back. Ideally, this should say hello, the name of the country that I'm passing. So let's enable developer tools. Okay, and then we could see the error, response to preflight request does not pass access control check. No access control allow origin header is present on the requested resource. So if we go back to the preflight check, the web browser, which is my HTML page, tried to call options, but there is no options method in my API gateway. So it got failure, and of course it did not get this access control allow origin. And if I go to network, so here you could see it made 2 calls to prove our theory. So if we click the first call and click headers, so it did the options call, but again, our API gateway API does not have an options method. So there was nothing to call, it failed. It got status 403. So it says I don't have the necessary access allow control origin and the other headers. So the web browser do the CORS error with the actual get call. Okay, so what do we need to do to make it pass? So we go to API gateway. So there are two ways to do this, right? So one way is you click actions and then you create a method, and that method should be options. Then you put all the headers in. But API gateway has given an easy way to implement it. So let's click enable CORS, and then I'm going to go through what happens. Under the actions, I'm going to click enable CORS, and it's going to say, hey, what headers you want it. And then it's going to give you some options. In this case, this API only has a get method. So that's why it says the allowed methods will only be get and options. If you had a post method, then it is going to give you an option to say post as well. So one thing to note, right? So even though the origin, www.example.com, is requesting the get and these specific headers, as a API provider or as the owner of the API, you can say, okay, I got it, but this is what you can do. It's not like you just say yes to all this stuff. You can say, hey, okay, you can do get, but you can also do post. Okay, you can pass these headers, but if you want, you can add in more headers as well. Similarly, access control allow origin, you can put asterisks even though this is for example. So this is what you do in this API gateway. So again, you can see access control allow origin is asterisk. We're going to keep this as asterisk. And then the access control allow headers, we have content type, XAMZ, okay, it already have XAPI key, all these options. Okay, so let's click enable CORS and replace existing CORS headers. There is nothing to replace at this point. So okay, it's just gonna create and add everything. All right, so you can see this options method get created. So now if we click this, so this is a mock endpoint. So this is not going to any backend. So all the magic is happening in this integration response. So if I click this and then click this header mappings, you can see it hard-coded all the headers. Access control allow headers, it's passing all this stuff. And again, to reiterate, even though the request is only passing, for our case, XAPI key, right? So if I go back to the HTML, only thing we are passing is XAPI key. But our API, our options method is saying, okay, cool, but I'm a generous guy. You can also pass these other headers as well if you want. Allow methods, get and options, allow origin asterisk, and then on the method response, this is going to respond with code 200, which is a good response, and it's going to pass on those three headers into the origin. So if you don't want to do the easy method, then you can optionally create the options method manually and then add all those header. And the method request is nothing fancy about it. It says, hey, the API key, even though this API is part of API key, you have not enabled it. We are not going to ignore that, and integration request is mock. So again, there is no fancy backend. It's just a mock options call. It's coming. Everything is hard-coded in integration response within the header and just passing it back to the client. All right, so now let's deploy this. Deploy API, deployment step, stage dev, click deploy. Okay, it's deployed pretty fast. Okay, let's go back to our HTML page, and then let's try this again. I'm gonna put a different name of a country. How about France? They have good wine. Okay, let's do click me. Here you go. Now it passed, and you could see hello from France. But let's take a look at the actual calls. So the first call, if I click, it's options. It returns 200 because if you guys and girls remember, this is because of this method response from the options. We are sending 200 back with all these headers. So if we check the headers, we should see all those headers: access control, allow methods, get options, origin asterisk, content type application JSON. That's coming from the method response itself. Here, content type. And then since the access control allow origin is asterisk, then the get call is also going through. Now let's go back to our slides and talk about a little bit complicated scenario. Okay, so let's take a look at what we did with the existing flow, right? So example.com or any origin in this case, options coming, we have mock integration, every header value hard-coded, allowed values returned, and then you do the actual get call. And then that going to an actual Lambda. And since I am testing from my local machine, like the HTML page is not really running on a server, it's running on my machine, I cannot really put a specific origin because it's not really a web server. So that's why I'm putting asterisks. But let's just for a moment, like we discussed, imagine that the call to the same API can come from example.com or maybe demo.com, right? So how you can accommodate it is, instead of doing a mock integration, you can actually call a Lambda even for the options method, and this Lambda can set the header instead of hard coding all the header values in the mock integration. If the call is coming from www.example.com, going to this CORS Lambda, it sets all the header values, and for access control allow origin, it's setting www.example.com. If it is coming from www.demo.com, then it's gonna set the access control allow origin as www.demo.com. And if it comes from any other website, then you can put logic in the Lambda not to send back any access control allow origin or don't set the headers. Then the API call from that origin that you don't want is gonna fail. So let me show you an example for this, because this one is pretty tricky. All right, so we're back to API gateway. So I created another API. This time also has get and options. However, if I go to options, instead of a mock integration, it is actually calling a Lambda. And this is a proxy integration. So if you go to integration request, this is a Lambda proxy integration. So whenever you check something on the proxy, API gateway says, nope, I'm not gonna touch it. Whatever the Lambda passes, I'm just gonna pass through. So that's why you cannot edit this integration response. You cannot really click it. And if we go to this Lambda, so this is the Lambda. So this is the logic. Now again, I commented out this logic. I just wanted to show you guys and girls because again, since I'm not running my HTML page in a web server, I'm not getting an origin in the incoming event. But let's say you are trying to call from web browser, say www.example.com, you will get it in a field in event, and then you can say, hey, return status code 200 and send these headers. Access control allow origin www.example.com, and the rest are the usual stuff. And if it says, hey, if event origin is www.demo.com, send the access control allow origin as www.demo.com. And if something else comes, nothing's gonna get sent and it's gonna get error. So no other website can call it. But for our testing, I'm just returning www.example.com to show you guys and girls. And then I have another HTML page. Everything is same as the last one, but in this case, I'm calling the URL for this API after I deployed it. Okay, so I'm gonna right click this HTML page, open with Chrome. Okay, and then we're gonna open up the developer tools. Okay, so, and then name of a country, USA, click me. Okay, so it failed, but this is interesting, right? Because the first call, which is the options call, it passed. Can you guys and girls think why the actual get call failed? Yep, because the options call, so if we see we are doing this options call, it's going to the Lambda, and the Lambda is sending the origin as www.example.com. And my origin is not www.example.com. So when I'm trying to do the actual get call, it is failing with the CORS error. So now let's go back to the Lambda, and instead of example.com, I'm just gonna pass asterisk. Again, there is no origin for HTML page that you are running locally. Okay, now let's go back to our page. Go back to network. It's easier to see the two calls. And let's put a name of a country. How about Australia? Always wanted to visit there. Okay, now if you click, there you go. This time it passes. Because if you go to the options call, it is coming back with access control allow origin as asterisk. So the browser is checking that and saying, all right, asterisk means all origin is allowed, so the get call is going through. And just a quick note, when you test your API gateway APIs with Postman, you don't need to put all this CORS stuff, because this CORS check only happens from the browsers. So don't get confused if you test your API in Postman and you are like, well, Raj, it's working, right? It's working because Postman doesn't do CORS check. But in real world scenario, your web server and browsers will do CORS check. So which brings us to the last topic, right, which I promised is a simple API call. So now that you guys and girls understand the non-simple and the flow, this will be super easy, but let's take a look. Okay, we are back to my simple HTML page. This time, no API key. That's the only change. That should make the cross-origin HTTP call as a simple one. So if I go to API gateway, this page is calling this API. There is no options. This is just a simple get method, and then it's calling this grid from country Lambda. So if we try to enter the country name and try to call it, let me enable developer tools. Okay, click network. So this should be a simple request. So you are not gonna see options. However, the get call should fail, right? Because we didn't do anything for CORS. So it's not gonna get any access control allow origin. So if I do click me, okay, as expected, it failed. Okay, so if I click name of the country, so this should be the get. Okay, this is the get method. And then if we go to console, you can see the CORS error, access control allow origin, header is not present. So that's why it failed. So how do you fix this for simple cross-origin requests? Pretty straightforward. You have two options. You can just put the header in integration response, which you're gonna do, or you can make a proxy integration and set the headers from your Lambda like we saw in the last example. But anyway, we're gonna click integration response. There is no header available here. Actually, we have to declare response by using method response. So you can just click it here. Okay, no response header. I'm just gonna add a header. I'm just gonna copy this from here. Access control allow origin. Go back to API gateway, paste this. Okay, and then we're gonna go back and put the value in the integration response. Okay, let's see. Okay, by default it's asterisk, so we're good. So if you want, you can change this to a particular value, but I'm not gonna do that. And then I'm just going to deploy the API. Okay, the API is deployed. All right, so I deployed the API. Let's put a name of the country. How about Holland? Click me. Okay, here we go. Hello from Holland. And then it went through. So if you click under network, you should see access control allow origin is set as asterisk. So that's why there is no CORS error. Alright guys and girls, that is the video. If you like this video, please click that like button, smash it if you are into that kind of thing, and subscribe. Alright, I'll see you guys and girls in the next video. Bye.